McLaren ended 2025 on top of Formula One. Fastest car. Both titles. Total control. But Formula One does not stand still, and 2026 is already demanding something different. This is no longer just about who had the best car before the rules changed. It is about whose car makes the most sense now. And early in this new era, McLaren do not look like a team with one simple weakness. They look like a team still trying to make the whole car work as one. At the end of last season, McLaren looked perfectly placed for a regulation reset. They had the strongest overall package, the reigning world champion in Lando Norris, and an Oscar Piastri campaign that gave them the kind of two-car strength every team wants and almost nobody gets. On paper, that should have made them one of the safest bets for 2026. But regulation resets are rarely that generous. Momentum helps, but only if the new rules reward the same strengths. And in 2026, they clearly do not. The technical challenge has changed completely. The cars are smaller, lighter, and narrower. Active aerodynamics now play a central role in how they behave between corners and straights. And the power unit has shifted sharply toward electrical performance, which means this is no longer just a contest of downforce and balance in the old sense. The quickest car now has to combine aero efficiency, deployment, recovery, drivability, and tyre behaviour into one package that stays usable across a full lap and a full weekend. That is where the McLaren story starts to get interesting, because their issue does not look like one dramatic flaw. It looks like a car that still has not become one clean, predictable system under these rules. You could hear some of that uncertainty even before the season began. After Bahrain testing, Andrea Stella was cautious, saying Ferrari and Mercedes looked like the teams to beat, with McLaren still near the front but showing a little less. At the time, that sounded like careful expectation management. Now, it sounds more like an early clue. McLaren did not speak like a team that believed its 2025 strengths had carried over untouched. They sounded like a team that already knew this formula was asking harder questions. Then Australia gave the first real answer. The result mattered, of course, but the more revealing part came afterward. Norris said McLaren needed to improve the car quite a lot, and made clear the issue was not just the power unit, it was the car itself. That shifts the diagnosis immediately. It stops being about one missing performance gain and starts becoming about the whole package. And once the problem becomes the whole package, the car starts to look different. Not necessarily slow in the simplest sense. More demanding than complete. More difficult to place in the right operating window. Less naturally connected than the best cars at the front. That can show up in several ways at once. Balance that moves too much. Energy behavior that is hard to optimize. Aero characteristics that do not stay consistent enough, or a driver who never quite gets the same answer from the car, corner after corner. That is why McLaren's early season has felt less like a team missing raw speed and more like a team still learning what kind of car it has built. From there, the first major weakness comes into focus: integration. McLaren and Mercedes use the same power unit, but they are not getting the same result from it. That alone tells you this is not a supplier story. It is an integration story. It is about how the chassis works around the power unit, how the control systems behave, how the aero platform supports the rest of the package, and how effectively the team can manage deployment and recovery without compromising the rest of the lap. Formula One's own technical analysis after China pointed to McLaren making progress in understanding how to run the Mercedes package more effectively. And Stella described the system as highly complex. That tells you where the fight really is. The issue is not just power. It is how the whole car is built to use it. And that leads naturally to the second weakness, the car's operating window. Even a quick car can become a difficult one if its best performance only appears in a narrow range. Under these rules, that matters even more. Active aero, electrical dependence, tyre preparation, ride behaviour, energy harvesting, deployment timing, all of it has to work in sync. If one part falls out of step, the whole lap starts to unravel. McLaren's early weekends have hinted at exactly that kind of problem. The car has not looked devoid of pace. It has looked difficult to unlock cleanly and repeatedly. That is what made China so useful, because it showed both sides of the McLaren picture at once.
On one side, there were genuine signs of progress. The qualifying gap to the identically powered Mercedes came down significantly from Melbourne to Shanghai. That suggests McLaren were beginning to understand how to extract more from the package. The car was not standing still. The team was finding something. But just as that progress started to become visible, the third weakness hit the story directly: electrical robustness. Neither McLaren started the Chinese Grand Prix. Stella later confirmed that the two cars had suffered separate failures involving the same power unit component on the electrical side. And in a formula built around much greater electrical dependence, that is not just an ugly race day detail. It points straight at one of the most sensitive parts of the entire concept. When the energy side becomes central to performance, reliability there stops being a side issue and becomes part of the core question of whether the car is truly ready. So by the end of those opening weekends, the McLaren profile looked much clearer. Not hopeless, not fundamentally broken, but incomplete in exactly the areas this regulation cycle punishes most harshly. That is what makes the current version of the car so fascinating. There are signs of pace in it. There are signs of learning in it. But there is still too much friction between those signs and a clean, repeatable race weekend. The package has shown potential, but not enough ease. It has shown movement, but not enough control. And when a team starts to understand a car at the same time that reliability exposes its fragility, the problem stops being simple underperformance and becomes something much more structural. They look like a team trying to turn a complicated car into a competitive one. Results will move around. One strong weekend can change the tone of a season, but the better question is whether McLaren can turn this car into something coherent. Because that is what the team is really chasing now. Not just more pace in isolation, but a car whose strengths stop pulling itself apart. And if you frame it that way, the picture becomes much sharper. Right now, McLaren seem to have three connected problems. They have not yet matched Mercedes in how well the full package is integrated around the power unit. They seem to have a narrow and demanding operating window, which makes performance harder to access consistently. And their electrical side reliability has already shown how fragile that complexity can become. Those are serious weaknesses, but they are also the kind of weaknesses teams can work on, precisely because they are specific. Formula One teams do not solve vague problems, they solve defined ones. And McLaren's early season, for all its mess, has at least started to define the car more clearly. That is why the situation is still open. Mercedes, at least so far, look like they already have a car that makes sense in this era. McLaren look like they have a car that can hint at the right answers without holding on to them for long enough. That is a frustrating place to be, but it is not the same as being lost. It means there is something there. The question is whether they can connect it quickly enough. And that is the real McLaren question in 2026. Not whether they were strong last year, not whether they still have talented people. Those parts are obvious. The real question is whether this car has enough underlying pace to survive its own weaknesses long enough for McLaren to solve them. Because right now, McLaren do not look like a team missing one answer. They look like a team trying to make several difficult answers agree with each other before the season gets away from them.